Hi, I'm Joe Butt, and you are watching Joe Butt TV. I'm with Chris Barrow, and we are doing the fourth of a series of little interviews where Chris gives us a little tip on different aspects of our dental professional life. The fourth one now is something that perhaps I'll be facing in the next decade, thinking of exit strategies. So, dentists have done what they could, they've enjoyed their professional life, they've enjoyed their business life. Kids have grown up, gone to university, probably got married. They got to a point where they think, you know what, let me get hold of my last asset. Because they're not going to sell their house in a hurry, because I'm sure nursing home days are still far away. So they still want to enjoy their time in their own private houses with their wives and or partners, and then go around the world and enjoy their success of being a professional. So exit strategies, there are so many combinations available of what you can do with your business. So Chris, where will you give us the tip?
Wow, where do you start with that one?
I didn't say it was going to be easy.
No, you know what? Of all the interviews that we're doing here, this is, in some respects, this is actually quite the most challenging, and because, of course, the overwhelming majority of the time, I'm working with people who are selling their business for the first time, and it's an experience they've never gone through before. And as you say in the introduction, it's an interesting combination of what I call emotion and mathematics, because mathematically it's obviously the biggest and most important financial transaction that they are likely to go through in their lives, and emotionally, of course, we have to admit that our businesses are one of our children.
Yeah.
And we've poured life and soul and body and mind and spirit into this thing for years and years and years and years and years, and it's like you're going to sell your daughter at auction. It's a really, really difficult psychological and emotional process. So there's this huge melting pot of emotions going on, and mathematics and economics going on, and the chances are that you are only sharing that experience with a spouse, possibly a business partner, but actually not very often. More often than not, the people that are contacting me are it's a family-owned business, and so you're trying to have this conversation with your spouse over dinner in the evening. You may, in some situations, be having the conversation that includes a practice manager, a long-serving, loyal practice manager, and of course they've got a whole bunch of emotion around this because they've invested their years in the business. So it's a huge melting pot. And the interesting thing about that is that there's you, a whole bag of emotion, on one side of the negotiating table, and it might well be that on the other side of the negotiating table there's either some guy who works for a private equity firm, or there's some guy who works for an insurance company, or there's some guy who works for an independent valuer. And you know what? They got up this morning and they had the breakfast and they came to work, and it's 9 to 5, and they're going to be home for their egg and chips at 6 o'clock, and you're just another deal.
Yeah.
And they've got 20 deals on the go any given week, and they're doing 100 deals a year. And you, frankly, with the best will in the world, you're just a name. It's Joe Bat, and it's filed under B. And that none of that emotion
Correct.
is invested in the relationship. So
unless it's a private buyer,
Unless
when there's two bundles of emotion,
and then,
then this bundle of emotion of selling and this bundle of emotion for buying.
yeah. So so the other alternative, and you put it quite well, is that we've either got a bag of nerves over here and a corporate or an accountant or a lawyer or somebody over there, or we've got a bag of nerves on one side of the table and another bag of nerves on the other side of the table. So it's a ridiculously potent combination, and so you want me to give some advice?
Yeah. So let's look at kind of a starting point. A guy starts to think about exit.
Yes.
Okay. So you'll be surprised. in the dental profession, we are a bit ignorant because we are so focused on what we do, providing patient care, looking after your team members,
Yeah.
and everything else. Sometimes they're a bit stuck about where do I start?
Okay.
Should I approach my associates? Should I put it on the local, in the dental magazine? Should I call a evaluation person? And they are literally blinded. Understandably, especially without being rude here, in the UK, everybody is a bit tight-lipped when it comes to selling a business. They don't like to share it with their friends.
Yeah.
They don't talk about it much. So much so they don't even talk about it with their spouses. And then they take that emotion to bed every night, don't sleep well.
Yeah.
So a little tip, Chris, as to where should a person start?
All right. So the first observation I'm going to make.
Get the paperwork in order.
It's not that. No, before we actually get to that stage.
Okay.
All right. But the first observation to make, and it's almost more psychology than business, but I think it's a very, very important point, is to make a decision that, Edward de Bono talks about 6-hat thinking, and you wear different coloured hats to represent different modes of thinking. A blue hat is creative, and a yellow hat is optimistic, and a black hat is pessimistic, and a white hat needs more data. It's fascinating material. Sheila Scott talks about it all the time. And I'm going to give you just 2 hats to wear.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to give you a red hat.
Yeah.
And the red hat symbolises the beating heart. This is the red hat of passion and emotion. And so there are going to be times when you're putting the red hat on and you're doing this business is one of my children routine on yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we're going to take that hat off and we're going to now put a white hat on. And a white hat is emotionally neutral, and the white hat is the business of mathematics.
Yeah.
Okay?
Numbers and figures.
Numbers and figures, because mathematics doesn't get moody.
Yeah.
And mathematics doesn't get annoyed and irritated and upset and so on.
Yeah.
Maths is maths.
Yeah.
And it's really important when you're working with clients at this particular phase in their lives that you have. I'm constantly finding myself saying this to a client who's in the process of selling a business. And the question I ask is this, Joe: do you want to have a conversation about the situation, or do you want to have a conversation about the way you feel about the situation?
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you a silly example of this. You've been along to an independent valuer, and the independent valuer has come along and said your business is worth $1 million.
Okay.
And you've got this piece of paper that you've paid for. And let's assume that for sale sign's gone up somewhere, and somebody's come in and had a look at your business, and they've said, okay, and it doesn't matter whether it's the corporate or the accountant or the healthcare company or whoever it is, they've had a look at your business and they've come back and they've said, okay, we'll offer you 900,000. And what you do is you grab the red hat and you put it on and you go, how dare you?
Say that, exactly. Yeah.
Because what you've heard is your daughter's ugly.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way you've received it, because you've allowed your emotion to take control first. And then what happens is you say, you know where you can shove your 900,000 and you go storming off down the street. And what I have to do with clients is to say, could you please just take that red hat off and put it down? And can we please put the white hat on? And let's try and understand why it is that offer has been made. All right. Is that offer been made because actually somebody else has made an economic assessment of the business that's different from the valuer, because the valuer might have been motivated by different economic factors than the purchaser?
Yeah.
Or is the purchaser trying to play a trick? Mm-hmm. Is the purchaser testing you out to see whether you're desperate or not?
It's like making a bid on a house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Now, you don't. It's an interesting metaphor, because when you go into an auction, it's really important that you don't wear the red hat in an auction, isn't it?
Sure, exactly.
Because what you do is you go into the auction and you say, that's my price.
Ceiling, yeah.
That's my ceiling.
Yeah.
And no matter how much I'm in love with that property, or no matter how much I'm in love with that painting or that statue, once we get to my ceiling, I'm walking out of the room and I'm getting on with my life. Now, if you put the red hat on, you end up paying twice as much as you should.
Correct.
for
Which
the
we have
asset.
all done.
We've all done it,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't, emotion is great in relationships.
Yeah, yeah.
I want a passionate woman in my life, but I don't want a passionate accountant who bursts into tears every time I have a bad month. Well, you get it?
Correct. Yeah.
So I think my first tip is be ever mindful of which hat you're wearing at every step along the way. All right?
We get that.
Let's go to the next stage. All right? The next stage when you're selling the practice is to, and let me tell you now, I already know that there are going to be some people that are going to watch this broadcast and you're not going to agree with what I'm about to say, and that's absolutely fine because, we live in a democracy, we're allowed to have opinions. This is my opinion, all right? My opinion is that you should look at the person who's sat on the other side of that table, whether it's a private equity guy or a lawyer or another independent private purchaser, and you should ask yourself 3 questions. And the first question is, do I trust this person? Do I have enough evidence personally or through third parties to be able to say that I can implicitly trust this person? Do I respect this person? I've done a little bit of research into them. I've had a look on LinkedIn. I've had a look around the industry, and I can respect what it is that they've achieved. And finally, do I like this person? When they walk in the room, does my hair stand on end and my skin creep? Or when they walk in the room, is it a man hug and let's get on? And I use that trust, respect, like test in just about every department of my life. And I make mistakes. And when I look back over my life at the mistakes I've made, I've always, here's the interesting thing, I've always made a mistake when I've allowed the white hat to overrule the red hat. Because somebody's offered me a deal that's been too good to be true, and I've seen the numbers, and I've gone for it, and then somewhere down the line, I've realised the red hat has kicked in, and I've realised that this person wasn't trustworthy, wasn't respectable, or I didn't actually like them too much. So there's an interesting thing. Is it all about the money, or is it all about feeling good about what it is that you're doing? And here's the thing. Whether or not you carry on working in the practice after it's sold, here's the reality. You're going to leave behind you a cohort of patients, and you're going to leave behind you a team of people. And the question is this: if you bumped into any one of those patients or any one of those team members a year after you'd sold the practice, would you want them to come across the street and give you a man hug?
Correct.
Or would you want them lobbing a brick over the street and saying, look at what happened to that business after you walked away with your big fat check?
What percentage do you think of current sellers walk with their chest held out and their head held high, that they have done the right thing for the practice over their own personal?
I could get myself in jail for answering that question.
No, it's an honest fact. But when does emotions outweigh financial benefits?
Okay, let me give you 2 answers to that question. All right, one of them relates to purchase by an institution, let's call it a corporate, and one of them relates to a purchase by another private individual or family. Okay, so let's talk about the corporates. The way to judge a corporate, and if there's a corporate making a bid for your business, here's what you do. You don't ask them, the corporate, to refer you to people whose practices that they've bought, because they're only going to refer you to the people that they're getting along with. Use your market intelligence, use your network within dentistry, and ask around and try and find some people who have sold out to the corporate and they're doing an earn out, and ask them how much fun they're having in the earn out. And here's what you'll find, and obviously no names, no pack drill, but here's what you'll find. There are some people who have sold out to some corporates who are telling you that they are counting the days down to get out of that goddamn earn out, because it's driving them nuts.
I know enough number of people.
You and I, Joe, know people
enough number of
who
people
are doing that.
Yeah.
And there are some people who are working their earn-out, they're enjoying it, and they're thinking of signing up for another period of extended clinical time because they're having a good experience. Now, ask yourself a question. If you're signing in for a 5-year earn-out with a corporate, does it matter how big the check was on day one, or does it matter how
enjoyable
what the quality
your
of that 5-year earn-out is going to be?
Very true.
And you and I, Joe, know people who are tearing their hair out waiting to get to the end of the earn-out, and I know a lot of people who are having the time of their lives in the earn-out. So that's point number one. Point number two, in terms of another independent purchase, the issue is, of course, whether you are going to stick around or not. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to stick around for any period of time after the purchase, it's the same question, which is, what is it going to be like working with this person as the boss?
Yeah.
So we're back to trust, respect, and like. But if you're off down the road, and that's it, you're putting the handpiece down and you're going to be playing golf or whatever, then think about your patients and think about your team and think about the legacy that you're leaving behind. Because as somebody once said, how much money did Paul Getty leave when he died? And the answer was all of it. Because when you're dead and gone, the money doesn't matter. What matters is what people
you left
say.
behind.
It's the legacy of relationships that you leave behind, which will ultimately, in my view, determine the quality of the experience that you've had as a human being. And if you can go to your grave knowing that people cross the street to hug you, I think that's a great way to end your life, as opposed to having to look round corners to see who's down the street before you actually pitch up yourself.
There's one more community which we haven't looked at. Coming from an Asian background, there are a lot of Asian families who have kids who have become dentists.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's there in other communities too, but I feel more so in from my race. What is the going trend with regards to when kids take over dad's or mom's business? Wow. There you go. I never said it was going to be easy.
The single most significant thing that's happened to me in my 21 years has been the cultural background of my client base. And what happened to me in the early 2000s was that the Asian community began to qualify from dental school, and then they began to buy practices. And what happened is that if you went back 15 years, I mean, these are very broad brush figures, but you would I would, if you'd have seen a Chris Barrow workshop in the late 1990s, it would have been 80-20, with 20% being the Asian community.
Not anymore.
And that now is completely reversed.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I'm running workshops and public speaking and so on, my expectation is 80% of the audience are going to be from an Asian background. And it's been a joy to work with those people, and as you know, it's also been a joy in recent years for me to actually get the opportunity to do some work in India and to meet that community as well. We've had great fun. And when I was doing, you remember the old VT system, and I used to speak at VT conferences years and years ago. And if I go back 10 years to the mid 2000s, I'd have dinner with the VTs, and one of my questions over dinner was, why did you come into dentistry? And the overwhelming majority of the time, the boys said, dental qualification made me marriageable, and I saw it as a great way of developing my investment property portfolio. That's what they said. Don't shoot the messenger. And the girls, who actually were in the majority, the girls said, great marriageable qualification, and dentistry is going to be a great way for me to generate cash flow before and after children. Now, you know what, in 2017 I might get shot for saying that, but again, don't shoot the messenger. That's what my audience was saying to me 10 to 15 years ago. One of the questions I've got is whether that's still the same phenomenon. And I've got a question mark over that. And the reason I've got that question mark is because when I was having that conversation 10 or 15 years ago, a newly qualified dentist had an expectation of earnings of probably 70, 80 grand a year. and then beyond.
Yeah.
Now, I lecture now to postgraduate groups, to recently qualified groups, to foundation dentists, and we have the dinner. And one of the questions I now ask is, what's your expectation of earnings for the first 5 years of your career? Let me tell the answer, Joe, 35 grand a year.
Yep. Shocking.
Okay,
Absolutely.
that's what's happened. You know, sorry about the bad news out there. That's what's happened.
Yeah.
So actually, my suspicion is that dentistry as a means of fulfilling those objectives from 10, 15 years ago is very much a moving landscape now. And that people may be coming into dentistry perhaps for different reasons, because the guys and gals that wanted the property portfolios and the cash flow might be looking at other sectors, and maybe that's one of the reasons that we're beginning to see a supply shortage in dentistry.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's two things going on at the moment. First thing that's going on is that post-Brexit, the Europeans are going home and they're not being replaced. And secondly, I think that there's a quantum shift in the Asian community that's coming into dentistry because of the suppressed incomes that we've seen in recent years. Now, of course, the interesting thing about that is that the natural law of supply and demand says associate remuneration is going to have to start coming back up again, because the supply of associates is beginning to run dry.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. When I was teaching at the dental school, sorry to interrupt there, you know, out of a group of 14 people that I was teaching, my little cohort of students at the London Dental School, 12 out of 14 were Asian. Out of the other two, one was a Turkish girl and the guy was Irish.
Yep.
So we had no British graduates.
Yep.
At all in my entire 14, and it's absolutely, and that was across the board. The whole dental school, we had, I think, 80-20 female to male ratio.
Yeah. So the good news is that if you look at the kind of we started all of this talking about demographic curves, you know, and there's probably still a demographic curve of Asian dentists that are like 35, 40, 45, 50, but the concern is that there's nobody coming in at the young end. The supply is beginning to dry up, and none of us, frankly, Joe, none of us can predict what the effect of that is going to be over the next 10 years. It's going to be fascinating to see how it pans out. The government would probably want to see more dental care professionals because they'd want to see more dentists. Sorry, let me start again. The government would want to see more non-dentists doing more work. So it will be interesting to see that effect. We've got then suddenly a shortage of homegrown dentists, and we've got a remarkable shortage of overseas dentists because Brexit has kicked that right in the proverbials, as it has in so many other areas of the British economy. And don't even get me started on that subject, okay, because you know I've got strong feelings about that. And so what's going to happen now is that dentistry is now going to enter a new phase where more non-dentists will be doing more work, fewer dentists will be in the workplace. Somebody asked me a question the other day at a meeting, which is, if I had an 18-year-old coming into dentistry, what would you advise them to do? I said, for goodness sake, train to be an implantologist. And if you don't want to be an implantologist, train to be a specialist, because the future is specialism. I stick my neck out? I think that the jobbing GDP associate is in danger of, I think they're an endangered species.
We'll be coming to that in a minute. You don't know this yet. We're coming to that. But that is fantastic tips. You know, which hat do you put on when you're trying to put your exit strategy on, your mind versus your head? Who do you trust? Who do you like? You know, who do you want to spend time with? And never underestimate. I think the bit that's a very important take-home message, whether you're selling to a private buyer or to a corporate, is never underestimate the importance of that paying off period. What do you call it? The earn out period. Never underestimate, because those 4 years can make you or kill you.
Absolutely.
You know, because you might absolutely hate working for somebody else. or you might enjoy the experience and would want to continue. I think that is essentially what I've also heard from people that I know, is that never underestimate that period of earnout, because I think that in this in the twilight of your professional life, not your general life, twilight of your professional life, last thing you want to do is spend 4 miserable years.
And the last thing we want to do is have a beer with a guy that's working through his earnout and he's miserable.
And he's miserable. And he's in the doldrum, and he stays in his cocoon forever.
Exactly.
Oh, that's not fair. That's not fair. But I hope you enjoyed these little interviews. My massive thank you to Chris Barrow. This is one of 4 that we have talked about from dentists from different phases in their career. Don't go away yet. There's a couple more clips coming on, very short ones, on Chris's experiences on a couple of other factors. So I look forward to seeing you all then. You are watching Joe Butt TV. Hi, I'm Joe Butt, and thank you for watching my channel. For more interviews with dentists, amazing implant surgeons, business leaders, entrepreneurs, people who think outside the box and create paradigm shifts in which the way we think, follow me on Joe Butt TV. I look forward to seeing you then.